My cousins were still laughing when I opened the crumpled envelope at my grandfather's funeral. While they got his $41 million estate, his collection of vintage yachts, and his private island off the coast of Maine, I got a single plane ticket to Monaco. My cousin Bridger actually fell off his chair laughing, holding his stomach like he'd just heard the world's greatest joke. But 24 hours later, standing in that Monaco airport, a man in a perfectly tailored suit would whisper 7 words that would change everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, and why he'd kept me at arm's length my entire life. The funeral had been a production, exactly the way Grandfather Aldrich would have wanted it. Black limousines lined the private drive of his Connecticut estate like a parade of beetles. Everyone who was anyone in New York society showed up to pay their respects to Aldrich Pemberton, the real estate titan who'd built half of Manhattan's luxury high-rises. My cousin Bridger stood at the entrance, greeting guests like he'd already inherited the throne. He wore a custom Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly teaching salary, his blonde hair slicked back with enough product to survive a hurricane. "Senator Walsh, thank you for coming," Bridger said, pumping the man's hand with practiced precision. Grandfather would have been honored. His sister Waverly was nearby, her designer black dress worth more than my car, live-streaming her grief to her 1 million followers. "This is just so hard," she said to her phone camera, a single tear rolling down her perfectly contoured cheek. Grandfather was everything to me. The moment she ended the stream, she checked how many likes she'd gotten and smiled. Then there was me, Nolan, standing by the coat check in my off-the-rack suit from 3 years ago, the chemistry teacher who needed to grade papers that night because my students had a test on Monday. The grandson who'd received exactly 5 phone calls from grandfather in 28 years of life. The family afterthought who'd learned about his death from a group text. My mother, Cordelia, found me hiding by the kitchen entrance. She was the youngest of grandfather's 3 children, the one who'd committed the cardinal sin of marrying for love instead of money. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" she asked, straightening my tie with the same gentle hands that had packed my school lunches for 18 years. "I'm fine, Mom. Just ready for this to be over." My father, Hollis, appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen because he knew neither of us could stomach the champagne being served. His carpenter's hands were scrubbed clean, but I could still see the faint stain of wood polish under his fingernails from the cabinet set he'd been building. "They're about to read the will," he said quietly. "We can leave right after if you want." But I didn't know then that the will reading would be the beginning, not the end. The study where they gathered us smelled like leather and old cigars, the same way it had during every awkward family dinner I'd been obligated to attend. Grandfather's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, sat behind the massive oak desk looking like an undertaker who'd won the lottery. His assistant had already laid out several thick manila envelopes, each one labeled with a name in Grandfather's precise handwriting. Bridger took the leather chair closest to the desk, already on his phone with his financial advisor. "Yes, I'll need you to prepare for a significant portfolio adjustment," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We're talking 8 figures, minimum." Waverly perched on the antique sofa, reapplying lipstick while her assistant filmed everything for documentation purposes, she claimed. "This is such important family history," she said to no one in particular. My Aunt Genevieve, Bridger's mother, sat ramrod straight in her chair, her pearl necklace catching the light from the crystal chandelier. She'd married into the family 40 years ago and had spent every day since acting like she'd been born a Pemberton. My Uncle Reginald, Waverly's father, stood by the window checking stock prices, because God forbid the market move without him for 5 minutes. And then there was our little family, clustered near the door like we were ready to run. Mom held Dad's hand, and I noticed how he rubbed his thumb across her knuckles the way he always did when she was nervous. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" That's when Bridger looked at me and smirked. "Hey, Nolan, I hope Grandpa remembered to leave you something. Maybe one of his old chemistry textbooks." He laughed at his own joke while Waverly giggled behind her manicured hand. I wanted to tell him that Grandfather had never owned a chemistry textbook in his life, that he probably didn't even know what I taught, but I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned long ago that in the Pemberton family, silence was safer than confrontation. Mr. Thorne opened the first envelope, Bridger's name gleaming in gold letters, and I saw my cousin lean forward like a wolf spotting prey. None of us knew that in exactly 36 hours, I'd be standing in a villa overlooking the Mediterranean, learning that everything we thought we knew about Aldrich Pemberton was only half the story. The half he wanted us to see, the half that was worth exactly $41 million. The other half? That was worth something you couldn't count in dollars. And he'd hidden it behind a crumpled envelope and a plane ticket that his other grandchildren thought was a joke. They were still laughing when I left the estate that day. They wouldn't be laughing if they knew the truth. Growing up, I was always the black sheep of the Pemberton family. My name is Nolan, and while my cousins Bridger and Waverly spent summers on Grandfather Aldrich's yacht learning to sail and attending charity galas, I was the kid who got Christmas cards with a crisp $50 bill and nothing more. No personal note, no invitation to visit, just his printed signature below a generic holiday greeting. I used to save those $50 bills in a shoebox under my bed, thinking maybe if I collected enough of them, they'd add up to something that mattered. They never did. My mother, Cordelia Pemberton Hayes, was Grandfather's youngest daughter and biggest disappointment. She'd been accepted to Yale Law School but chose love instead, marrying my father, Hollis Hayes, the summer after college graduation. Dad was a carpenter who built custom furniture with his hands, while the Pemberton men built empires with phone calls and handshakes. At their wedding, according to family legend, Grandfather gave a toast that sounded more like a eulogy. "To Cordelia," he'd said, raising his champagne glass, "may she find happiness in the simple life she's chosen." The message was clear. She was dead to him, at least the version of her he'd imagined. Our house in Queens was a universe away from the Pemberton compound in Connecticut. Dad had restored every inch of it himself, from the hand-carved staircase banister to the kitchen cabinets that closed with a whisper. Mom taught piano lessons in our living room, and the sound of scales and arpeggios was the soundtrack of my childhood. We had Friday pizza nights and Saturday morning pancakes, and when the furnace broke one January, we all slept in sleeping bags by the fireplace and told ghost stories. "We're rich in ways that matter," Mom would say when I came home from school, upset about not having the latest sneakers or video game console. "Your grandfather has money. We have each other." But it still stung when Bridger would return from his summers in the Hamptons, tanned and full of stories about sailing to Martha's Vineyard, or flying to Paris for a weekend because Grandfather wanted authentic croissants. He was 3 years older than me, built like a quarterback, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world was designed for people like him. "Hey, Nolan," he'd say at family gatherings, slapping me too hard on the back. "Still teaching kids their ABCs?" "I teach chemistry to high schoolers," I'd correct him for the 100th time. Right, baking soda volcanoes and stuff. Cute. Waverly was even worse in her own way. A year older than me, she'd transformed herself into an influencer, documenting every moment of her charmed life for her followers. She'd show up to family dinners with a camera crew, turning grandmother's funeral into a content opportunity. "Grief is just another part of my journey I want to share with my community," she'd said, positioning herself perfectly in the light while tears fell on cue. The divide was most obvious at Grandfather's annual Christmas gathering. Bridger would be in the study with Grandfather and the other men, discussing market trends and acquisition opportunities. Waverly would be showing off her latest sponsorship deals, modeling jewelry that cost more than Dad made in a year, and I'd be in the kitchen with Mom and Dad, helping the caterers and listening to Dad trade jokes with the waitstaff. One year, when I was 16,